This is section 128 of Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain, section 128, The Galaxy, February 1871, Part 2. The Galaxy, February 1871. Memoranda by Mark Twain. The Tone Imparting Committee. When I get old and ponderously respectable, only one thing will be able to make me truly happy, and that will be to be put on the venerable tone-imparting committee of the city of New York, and have nothing to do but sit on the platform, solemn and imposing, along with Peter Cooper, Horace Greeley, etc., etc., and shed momentary fame at second hand on obscure lecturers, draw public attention to lectures which would otherwise clack eloquently to sounding emptiness, and subdue audiences into respectful hearing of all sorts of unpopular and outlandish dogmas and isms. That is what I desire for the cheer and gratification of my gray hairs. Let me but sit up there with those fine relics of the old red sandstone period, and give tone to an intellectual entertainment twice a week, and be so reported, and my happiness will be complete. Those men have been my envy for a long, long time, and no memories of my life are so pleasant as my reminiscence of their long and honorable career in the tone-imparting service. I can recollect the first time I ever saw them on the platforms just as well as I can remember the events of yesterday. Horace Greeley sat on the right, Peter Cooper on the left, and Thomas Jefferson, Red Jacket, Benjamin Franklin, and John Hancock sat between them. This was on the 22nd of December, 1799, on the occasion of the state funeral of George Washington in New York. It was a great day, that, a great day, and a very, very sad one. I remember that Broadway was one mass of black crape from Castle Garden nearly up to where the City Hall now stands. The next time I saw these gentlemen officiate was at a ball, given for the purpose of procuring money and medicines for the sick and wounded soldiers and sailors. Horace Greeley occupied one side of the platform on which the musicians were exalted, and Peter Cooper the other. There were other tone-imparters attendant upon the two chiefs, but I have forgotten their names now. Horace Greeley, gray-haired and beaming, was in sailor costume, white duck pants, blue shirt open at the breast, large neckerchief, loose as an ox-bow, and tied with a jaunty sailor knot, broad turnover collar with star in the corner, shiny black little tarpaulin hat roosting daintily far back on head and flying two gallant long ribbons, slippers on ample feet, round spectacles on benignant nose, and pitchfork in hand completed Mr. Greeley, and made him, in my boyish admiration, every inch a sailor, and worthy to be the honored great-grandfather of the Neptune he was so ingeniously representing. I shall never forget him. Mr. Cooper was dressed as a general of militia, and was dismally and oppressively warlike. I neglected to remark, in the proper place, that the soldiers and sailors in whose aid the ball was given had just been sent in from Boston. This was during the War of 1812. At the grand national reception of Lafayette in 1824, Horace Greeley sat on the right and Peter Cooper on the left. The other tone-imparters of that day are sleeping the sleep of the just now. I was in the audience when Horace Greeley, Peter Cooper, and other chief citizens imparted tone to the great meetings in favor of French liberty in 1848. Then I never saw them any more until here lately. But now that I am living tolerably near the city, I run down every time I see it announced that Horace Greeley, Peter Cooper, and several other distinguished citizens will occupy seats on the platform. And next morning, when I read in the first paragraph of the phonographic report that Horace Greeley, Peter Cooper, and several other distinguished citizens occupied seats on the platform, I say to myself, thank God I was present. Thus I have been enabled to see these substantial old friends of mine sit on the platform and give tone to lectures on anatomy, and lectures on agriculture, and lectures on stirpiculture, and lectures on astronomy, on chemistry, on miscegenation, on "Is man descended from the kangaroo?" on veterinary matters, on all kinds of religion, and several kinds of politics, and have seen them give tone and grandeur to the four-legged girl, the Siamese twins, the great Egyptian sword-swallower, and the old original Jacobs. Whenever somebody is to lecture on a subject not of general interest, I know that my venerated remains of the old red sandstone period will be on the platform. Whenever a lecturer is to appear whom nobody has heard of before, nor will be likely to seek to see, I know that the real benevolence of my old friends will be taken advantage of, and that they will be on the platform and in the bills as an advertisement. And whenever any new and obnoxious deviltry in philosophy, morals, or politics is to be sprung upon the people, I know perfectly well that these intrepid old heroes will be on that platform too, in the interest of full and free discussion, and to crush down all narrower and less generous souls with the solid dead weight of their awful respectability. And let us all remember that while these inveterate and imperishable presiders, if you please, appear on the platform every night in the year as regularly as the volunteered piano from Steinway's or Chickering's, and have bolstered up and given tone to a deal of questionable merit and obscure emptiness in their time, they have also diversified this inconsequential service by occasional powerful uplifting and upholding of great progressive ideas which smaller men feared to meddle with or countenance. The Galaxy, February, 1871. MEMORANDA by Mark Twain. The Danger of Lying in Bed. The man in the ticket office said, "Have an accident insurance ticket also?" "No," I said, after studying the matter over a little. "No, I believe not. I am going to be traveling by rail all day to-day. However, to-morrow I don't travel. Give me one for to-morrow." The man looked puzzled. He said, "But it is for accident insurance, and if you are going to travel by rail—" "If I am going to travel by rail I shan't need it. Lying at home in bed is the thing I'm afraid of." I had been looking into this matter. Last year I traveled 20,000 miles, almost entirely by rail. The year before I traveled over 25,000 miles, half by sea and half by rail, and the year before that I traveled in the neighborhood of 10,000 miles exclusively by rail. I suppose if I put in all the little odd journeys here and there, I may say I have traveled 60,000 miles during the 3 years I have mentioned, and never an accident. For a good while I said to myself every morning, "Now I have escaped thus far, and so the chances are just that much increased that I shall catch it this time. I will be shrewd and buy an accident ticket." And to a dead moral certainty I drew a blank, and went to bed that night without a joint started or a bone splintered. I got tired of that sort of daily bother, and fell to buying accident tickets that were good for a month. I said to myself, a man can't buy 30 blanks in one bundle. But I was mistaken. There was never a prize in the lot. I could read of railway accidents every day. The newspaper atmosphere was foggy with them. But somehow they never came my way. I found I had spent a good deal of money in the accident business, and had nothing to show for it. My suspicions were aroused, and I began to hunt around for somebody that had won in this lottery. I found plenty of people who had invested, but not an individual that had ever had an accident or made a cent. I stopped buying accident tickets and went to ciphering. The result was astounding. The peril lay not in traveling, but in staying at home. I hunted up statistics, and was amazed to find that after all the glaring newspaper headings concerning railroad disasters, less than 300 people had really lost their lives by those disasters in the preceding 12 months. The Erie road was set down as the most murderous in the list. It had killed 46, or 26, I do not exactly remember which, but I know the number was double that of any other road. But the fact straightway suggested itself that the Erie was an immensely long road, and did more business than any other line in the country, so the double number of killed ceased to be matter for surprise. By further figuring, it appeared that between New York and Rochester the Erie ran 8 passenger trains each way every day, 16 altogether, and carried a daily average of 6,000 persons. That is about 1,000,000 in 6 months, the population of New York City. Well, the Erie kills from 13 to 23 persons out of its 1,000,000 in 6 months, and in the same time 13,000 of New York's 1,000,000 die in their beds. My flesh crept, my hair stood on end. "This is appalling," I said. "The danger isn't in traveling by rail, but in trusting to those deadly beds. I will never sleep in a bed again." I had figured on considerably less than one-half the length of the Erie road. It was plain that the entire road must transport at least 11 or 12,000 people every day. There are many short roads running out of Boston that do fully half as much, a great many such roads. There are many roads scattered about the Union that do a prodigious passenger business. Therefore it was fair to presume that an average of 2,500 passengers a day for each road in the country would be about correct. There are 846 railway lines in our country, and 846 times 2,500 are 2,115,000. So the railways of America move more than 2 millions of people every day, 650 millions of people a year, without counting the Sundays. They do that, too, there's no question about it, though where they get the raw material is clear beyond the jurisdiction of my arithmetic. For I have hunted the census through and through, and I find that there are not that many people in the United States, by a matter of 610 millions at the very least. They must use some of the same people over again, likely. San Francisco is 1/8 as populous as New York. There are 60 deaths a week in the former, and 500 a week in the latter, if they have luck. That is 3,120 deaths a year in San Francisco, and 8 times as many in New York, say about 25,000 or 26,000. The health of the two places is the same, so we will let it stand as a fair presumption that this will hold good all over the country, and that consequently 25,000 out of every 1,000,000 of people we have must die every year. That amounts to 1/40th of our total population. 1,000,000 of us, then, die annually. Out of this 1,000,000, 10 or 12,000 are stabbed, shot, drowned, hanged, poisoned, or meet a similarly violent death in some other popular way, such as perishing by kerosene lamp and hoop-skirt conflagrations, getting buried in coal-mines, falling off housetops, breaking through church or lecture-room floors, taking patent medicines, or committing suicide in other forms. The Erie Railroad kills from 23 to 46. The other 845 railroads kill an average of 1/3 of a man each, and the rest of that 1,000,000, amounting in the aggregate to the appalling figure of 987,631 corpses, die naturally in their beds. You will excuse me from taking any more chances on those beds. The railroads are good enough for me, and my advice to all people is, don't stay at home any more than you can help. But when you have got to stay at home a while, buy a package of those insurance tickets and sit up nights. You cannot be too cautious. One can see now why I answered that ticket agent in the manner recorded at the top of this sketch. The moral of this composition is, that thoughtless people grumble more than is fair about railroad management in the United States. When we consider that every day and night of the year full 14,000 railway trains of various kinds, freighted with life and armed with death, go thundering over the land, the marvel is, not that they kill 300 human beings in a 12-month, but that they do not kill 300 times 300. The Galaxy, February, 1871. Memoranda by Mark Twain. One of mankind's bores. I suppose that if there is one thing in the world more hateful than another to all of us, it is to have to write a letter. A private letter especially. And business letters, to my thinking, are very little pleasanter. Nearly all the enjoyment is taken out of every letter I get by the reflection that it must be answered, and I do so dread the affliction of writing those answers that often my first and gladdest impulse is to burn my mail before it is opened. For 10 years I never felt that sort of dread at all, because I was moving about constantly from city to city, from state to state, and from country to country, and so I could leave all letters unanswered if I chose, and the writers of them would naturally suppose that I had changed my post-office and missed receiving my correspondence. But I am cornered now. I cannot use that form of deception any more. I am anchored, and letters of all kinds come straight to me with deadly precision. They are letters of all sorts and descriptions, and they treat of everything. I generally read them at breakfast, and right often they kill a day's work by diverting my thoughts and fancies into some new channel, thus breaking up and making confusion of the program of scribbling I had arranged for my working hours. After breakfast I clear for action, and for an hour try hard to write, but there is no getting back into the old train of thought after such an interruption, and so at last I give it up and put off further effort till next day. One would suppose that I would now answer those letters and get them out of the way. And I suppose one of those model young men we read about, who enter New York barefoot and live to become insolent millionaires, would be sure to do that. But I don't. I never shall be a millionaire, and so I disdain to copy the ways of those men. I did not start right. I made a fatal mistake to begin with, and entered New York with boots on and above 40 cents in my pocket. With such an unpropitious beginning, any efforts of mine to acquire great wealth would be frowned upon as illegitimate, and I should be ruthlessly put down as an impostor. And so, as I said before, I declined to follow the lead of those chrysalis Croesuses and answer my correspondence with commercial promptness. I stop work for the day, and leave the new letters stacked up along with those that came the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that, and so on. And by the pile grows so large that it begins to distress me, and then I attack it and give full 5 and sometimes 6 hours to the assault. And how many of the letters do I answer in that time? Never more than 9, usually only 5 or 6. The correspondence clerk in a great mercantile house would answer 100 in that many hours, but a man who has spent years in writing for the press cannot reasonably be expected to have such facility with a pen. From old habit he gets to thinking and thinking, patiently puzzling for minutes together over the proper turning of a sentence in an answer to some unimportant private letter, and so the precious time slips away. It comes natural to me in these latter years to do all manner of composition laboriously and ploddingly, private letters included. Consequently, I do fervently hate letter writing, and so do all the newspaper and magazine men I am acquainted with. The above remarks are by way of explanation and apology to parties who have written me about various matters, and whose letters I have neglected to answer. I tried in good faith to answer them, tried every now and then, and always succeeded in clearing off several, but always as surely left the majority of those received each week to lie over till the next. The result was always the same, to wit, the unanswered letters would shortly begin to have a reproachful look about them, next an upbraiding look, and by an aggressive and insolent aspect, and when it came to that I always opened the stove door and made an example of them. The return of cheerfulness and the flight of every feeling of distress on account of neglected duty was immediate and thorough. I do not answer the letter of the Wisconsin gentleman who inquired whether imported brads were better than domesticated ones, because I did not know what brads were, and did not choose to let on to a stranger. I thought it would have looked much better in him, anyhow, to have asked somebody who he knew was in the habit of eating brads, or wearing them, whichever is the proper way of utilizing them. I did manage to answer the little Kentucky boy who wished to send me his wildcat. I thanked him very kindly and cordially for his donation, and said I was very fond of cats of all descriptions, and told him to do like the little Indiana boy and forward it to Reverend Mr. Beecher, and I would call and get it some time. I could not bear to check the warm young tide of his generosity, and yet I had no immediate use for the insect myself. I did not answer the young man who wrote me from Tennessee, inquiring how to become a good reporter and acceptable journalist, chiefly because if one marks out the nice, easy method, which he knows these kinds of inquirers have in their mind's eye, they straightway begin to afflict him with semi-weekly specimens of what they can do, under the thin disguise of a friendly correspondence. And if he marks out the unromantic and unattractive method, which he believes in his heart to be the absolutely necessary one, they always write back and call him a nigger or a thief. These people are so illogical. The Galaxy, February 1871. Memoranda by Mark Twain. The indignity put upon the remains of George Holland by the Reverend Mr. Sabine. What a ludicrous satire it was upon Christian charity, even upon the vague theoretical idea of it which doubtless this small saint mouths from his own pulpit every Sunday. Contemplate this freak of nature, and think what a Cardiff giant of self-righteousness is crowded into his pygmy skin. If we probe and dissect and lay open this diseased, this cancerous piety of his, we are forced to the conviction that it is the production of an impression on his part that his guild do about all the good that is done in the earth, and hence are better than common clay, hence are competent to say to such as George Holland, "You are unworthy, you are a play-actor, and consequently a sinner. I cannot take the responsibility of recommending you to the mercy of heaven." It must have had its origin in that impression, else he would have said, "We are all instruments for the carrying out of God's purposes. It is not for me to pass judgment upon your appointed share of the work, or to praise or to revile it. I have divine authority for it that we are all sinners, and therefore it is not for me to discriminate and say we will supplicate for this sinner, for he was a merchant prince or a banker, but we will beseech no forgiveness for this other one, for he was a play-actor." It surely requires the furthest possible reach of self-righteousness to enable a man to lift his scornful nose in the air and turn his back upon so poor and pitiable a thing as a dead stranger come to beg the last kindness that humanity can do in its behalf. This creature has violated the letter of the gospel and judged George Holland, not George Holland either, but his profession through him. Then it is in a measure fair that we judge this creature's guild through him. In effect he has said, "We are the salt of the earth, we do all the good work that is done. To learn how to be good, and do good, men must come to us. Actors and such are obstacles to moral progress." Note: Reporter: What answer did you make, Mr. Sabine? Mr. Sabine: I said that I had a distaste for officiating at such a funeral, and that I did not care to be mixed up in it. I said to the gentleman that I was willing to bury the deceased from his house, but that I objected to having the funeral solemnized at a church. Reporter: Is it one of the laws of the Protestant Episcopal Church that a deceased theatrical performer shall not be buried from the church? Mr. Sabine: It is not, but I have always warned the professing members of my congregation to keep away from theaters, and not to have anything to do with them. I don't think they teach moral lessons. New York Times. Pray look at the thing reasonably for a moment, laying aside all biases of education and custom. If a common public impression is fair evidence of a thing, then this minister's legitimate, recognized, and acceptable business is to tell people calmly, coldly, and in stiff, written sentences, from the pulpit, to go and do right, be just, be merciful, be charitable, and his congregation forget it all between church and home. But for 50 years it was George Holland's business on the stage to make his audience go and do right and be just, merciful, and charitable, because by his living, breathing, feeling pictures he showed them what it was to do these things, and how to do them, and how instant and ample was the reward. Is it not a singular teacher of men, this reverend gentleman who is so poorly informed himself as to put the whole stage under ban and say, "I do not think it teaches moral lessons"? Where was ever a sermon preached that could make filial ingratitude so hateful to men as the sinful play of King Lear? Or where was there ever a sermon that could so convince men of the wrong and the cruelty of harboring a pampered and unanalyzed jealousy as the sinful play of Othello? And where are there 10 preachers who can stand in the pulpit teaching heroism, unselfish devotion, and lofty patriotism, and hold their own against any one of 500 William Tells that can be raised up upon 500 stages in the land at a day's notice? It is almost fair and just to aver, although it is profanity, that 9/10 of all the kindness and forbearance and Christian charity and generosity in the hearts of the American people today got there by being filtered down from their fountainhead, the gospel of Christ, through dramas and tragedies and comedies on the stage, and through the despised novel and the Christmas story, and through the 1,001 lessons, suggestions, and narratives of generous deeds that stir the pulses and exalt and augment the nobility of the nation day by day from the teeming columns of 10,000 newspapers, and not from the drowsy pulpit. All that is great and good in our particular civilization came straight from the hand of Jesus Christ, and many creatures, and of divers sorts, were doubtless appointed to disseminate it. And let us believe that this seed and the result are the main thing, and not the cut of the sower's garment, and that whosoever, in his way and according to his opportunity, sows the one and produces the other, has done high service and worthy. And further, let us try with all our strength to believe that whenever old simple-hearted George Holland sowed this seed, and reared his crop of broader charities and better impulses in men's hearts, it was just as acceptable before the throne as if the seed had been scattered in vapid platitudes from the pulpit of the ineffable Sabine himself. Am I saying that the pulpit does not do its share towards disseminating the marrow, the meat of the gospel of Christ? For we are not talking of ceremonies and wire-drawn creeds now, but the living heart and soul of what is pretty often only a spectre. No, I am not saying that the pulpit teaches assemblages of people twice a week, nearly 2 hours altogether, and does what it can in that time. The theater teaches large audiences 7 times a week, 28 or 30 hours altogether, and the novels and newspapers plead and argue and illustrate, stir, move, thrill, thunder, urge, persuade, and supplicate at the feet of millions and millions of people every single day, and all day long, and far into the night. And so these vast agencies till 9/10 of the vineyard, and the pulpit tills the other tenth. Yet now and then some complacent blind idiot says, "You unanointed are coarse clay and useless. You are not as we, the regenerators of the world. Go, bury yourselves elsewhere, for we cannot take the responsibility of recommending idlers and sinners to the yearning mercy of heaven." How does a soul like that stay in a carcass without getting mixed with the secretions and sweated out through the pores? Think of this insect condemning the whole theatrical service as a disseminator of bad morals because it has black crooks in it. forgetting that if that were sufficient ground, people would condemn the pulpit because it had cooks and collocs and sabines in it. No, I am not trying to rob the pulpit of any atom of its full share and credit in the work of disseminating the meat and marrow of the gospel of Christ, but I am trying to get a moment's hearing for worthy agencies in the same work, that with overwrought modesty seldom or never claim a recognition of their great services. I am aware that the pulpit does its excellent 1/10, and credits itself with it now and then, though most of the time a press of business causes it to forget it. I am aware that in its honest and well-meaning way it bores the people with uninflammable truisms about doing good, bores them with correct compositions on charity, bores them, chloroforms them, stupefies them with argumentative mercy, without a flaw in the grammar, or an emotion which the minister could put in the right place if he turned his back and took his finger off the manuscript. And in doing these things the pulpit is doing its duty, and let us believe that it is likewise doing its best, and doing it in the most harmless and respectable way. And so I have said, and shall keep on saying, let us give the pulpit its full share of credit in elevating and ennobling the people, but when a pulpit takes to itself authority to pass judgment upon the work and the worth of just as legitimate an instrument of God as itself, who spent a long life preaching from the stage the self-same gospel without the alteration of a single sentiment or a single axiom of right, it is fair and just that somebody who believes that actors were made for a high and good purpose, and that they accomplish the object of their creation and accomplish it well, to protest. And having protested, it is also fair and just, being driven to it, as it were, to whisper to the Sabine pattern of clergymen, under the breath, a simple, instructive truth, and say, ministers are not the only servants of God upon earth, nor his most efficient ones either, by a very, very long distance. Sensible ministers already know this, and it may do the other kind good to find it out. But to cease teaching and go back to the beginning again, was it not pitiable, that spectacle? Honored and honorable old George Holland, whose theatrical ministry had for 50 years softened hard hearts, bred generosity in cold ones, kindled emotion in dead ones, uplifted base ones, broadened bigoted ones, and made many and many a stricken one glad, and filled it brimful of gratitude, figuratively spit upon in his unoffending coffin by this crawling, slimy, sanctimonious, self-righteous reptile. End of section 128.